Welcome to Sacramento's very own winemaking club.
A little old wine drinker me.
In this tutorial we'll explore yeast, how to create a yeast starter and how to begin the fermentation process. So here I'm going to show you how to make a yeast starter. It's very simple. All we need is a few simple ingredients, obviously the yeast. In this case I'm using D254 from Lavlin. It's a very simple and robust yeast, works with many red wines and also some white wines. One thing, you might want to choose different ones for different reasons, for different flavors, for whatever. But the most important is that you have a yeast which will work with what you expect the alcohol strength of your wine will be. This can be determined, of course, from the Brix or sugar content, which can determine what the potential alcohol is. In addition to the yeast, I have a yeast energizer. This is simply store-bought. It has nutrients which can provide the yeast. I put it in the starter, and also that then goes into the yeast itself. And of course, sugar, which is yeast's favorite food. I have various other utensils. A thermometer is important. This I have to use to gauge the temperatures. My trusty teaspoon for measurement and stirring. A measuring jug for waters and liquids. Mostly important is the juice from the wine must that I've already picked and crushed. This I add to the starter. It has the nutrients of the wine already, and it introduces the yeast slowly to what it's going to be living on for the next week or two. So in the process of making the yeast starter, we're going to optimize the yeast so it's going to start producing alcohol as quickly as possible. These guys, these little yeast guys, they know exactly what to do. They eat sugar, they produce alcohol, they eat sugar, produce alcohol, oh, and they reproduce and eat more sugar and produce more alcohol. However, these are our little friends, so we do need to be as kind to them as possible. It's more than likely that if you just simply sprinkle these yeast pellets onto your fresh must, eventually the yeast will start growing and producing alcohol. But I stress eventually. We want to optimize this process so it starts as quickly as possible. So producing a starter mix is what we want to do. We have to mix the yeast with some nutrients and food in the form of sugar, and also in the form of the juice from the grapes itself. That gets it going, producing our starter kit. We produce it at the right temperature, and then when we introduce it to the grape must itself, we have to make sure that the temperature difference isn't too extreme. If we're pouring hot or warm yeast mixture into a cold must, that's going to shock the yeast and kill most of them off, if not all of them. And vice versa, a cold yeast starter kit into a hot must, the shock again will damage the yeast. So we just want to be a little bit careful. But that's not too much that we have to worry about. The tolerances are reasonable. So we'll start with water. Avoid tap water because that contains chlorine, which may slow down the yeast. Bottled water is probably the best. I'm going to compromise with filtered water from my fridge. Next, use a kettle or a pan to warm the water between 100 and 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Add a couple of teaspoons of sugar and about 20% of juice to your warm water. Stir it up, and then with the water temperature not exceeding 104 degrees Fahrenheit, stir in the yeast itself. Once you're happy that everything's mixed together into your yeast starter mix, cover it. I use foil because it doesn't make an airtight seal, but it keeps prying eyes, dirty fingers, flies, dust, and you name it, out. Put it to one side where it will keep warm and allow it to start its fermentation process. So now I'm ready to add my yeast starter to my must. Here I have 5 or 6 gallons of must in my plastic bucket all ready to start fermenting. Here I have the yeast starter that I prepared earlier. Every hour or so I've been adding a little bit more juice, about 20% at the time, just to keep this up. Now I know that my temperature of this is 86 degrees, and I know the temperature of my must is 72 degrees Fahrenheit or 24 degrees centigrade. My yeast starter is still at 86 degrees Fahrenheit or 30 degrees centigrade, and even as I'm speaking, the temperature of the this is remaining stable, more or less, and my yeast starter is slowly going down in temperature. So that's easily 10.8 degrees difference and decreasing. So I know that I'm within the 15 degree Fahrenheit tolerances of adding the starter to the must. So it's just now a very simple question of adding the yeast starter to my must. So here it is, and here we are. That can't have been all that difficult. Other things you have to do: stir it in well, get it fairly well diffuse around the must. It will find its way around. Yeast know what to do. They know how to find that sugar, so they will spread of their own accord. But like I said, they are our friends, so let's give them a helping hand. A slightly bigger ladle might not go amiss at this stage, but this will suffice. Other things to consider. Headspace. As you can see, I've only got 2 or 3 inches there. I really could do a little bit more, because once the fermentation takes hold, the carbon dioxide gas being generated within the must pushes the grapes up, makes them float. So they come up to the top and they need space to rise. At least on a daily basis, you have to do what's called punch down, because they tend to dry off at the top and they need to be mixed back into the juicy must and kept moist. Otherwise those grapes will not ferment. So we want to keep everything well mixed. Some people do it 2 or even 3 times a day. It depends on your grapes, depends on what results you want, and depends on how anxious you are. And also depends on how much headroom you have. So, I have a clean lid, a hole punched through for my airlock. Simple question to put this here and pressing it down so it's nice and sealed. The airlock, of course, has a little bung, so it'll go in the hole. I will fill it with water to create the airtight seal, but basically it simply presses in there. As the fermentation takes hold and gases are produced, you will see the bubbling up here at least once a second, if not more frequently. Now, you've noticed that the headspace is quite small, so I'm in danger of the must pushing up and actually coming up through here, because it can't escape around the rim, so I might get some overspill. That's not a problem. It's something I'm at risk of, but I'll take care of that later on. I might ladle some out and put it into another container. But you do have to think about these things and take some precautions, which is why I'm here in the bathtub. It's not because I like to keep clean, it's because I like something to catch it. But you might have other ways of catching your overspill. Simple newspapers, towels, or some sort of bowl or bucket that this can stand in. Bigger containers have other problems, so you do have to consider your headspace much more carefully. Here you can see the CO2 bubbling through the airlock. The frequency of, or the speed of bubbles may vary depending on the strength of your fermentation. Don't be alarmed if it doesn't go this fast immediately. It may take some time to take hold. Give it patience and time. Here's an example of too little headroom, where the juice is being forced out through the airlock. If this ever happens, don't panic. All you have to do is reduce the levels inside, but save the juice. Simply use something like a muslin bag to squeeze out the excess berries and grapes and press the juice back into the container until you're satisfied with the levels. Okay, so this is less than 24 hours that I've added the yeast, and it's already cooking furiously. The fermentation is well underway. As I said before, the headroom will be decreasing because the carbon dioxide gas within the must will be rising and trying to escape, pushing up the grapes, and the grapes will then start to float and of course dry off. So what we have to do now is called punch down, where we have to put the layer of that grape, break it through and push it back down into the must. Quite a simple process really, but don't do this in your Sunday best going to meeting clothes because you will get splashes and spillage. So be warned. So as you can see, it's all risen to the top. It smells wonderful, by the way. So using my trusty label, preferably use something longer which can reach further down, but I like stainless steel and this is all I have to hand. I'm just using simple kitchen materials. So you can see it has a bit of resistance to it. So press it in. And this is where those splashes and designer clothes damage comes in. So just get it in there. You can see how the juice is there, bubbling away quite happily. Carbon dioxide is coming out. Don't worry too much about infections at this point because the yeast, as it produces the alcohol and carbon dioxide, kind of protects itself. Any living thing that does get inside this this bucket and tries to live in the headspace, it'll be suffocated by the carbon dioxide. And although the alcohol now is kind of weak, in fact very weak, eventually that will build up to kill any germs. But do keep things clean and keep your must protected at all times from any foreign bodies. And that should do the trick. Now we can cover it again and let it continue to cook.